You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast.
What was that process for you when you're creating the content? What advice do you have for somebody that is in? I've wrestled with that because I have let go, or what feels like letting go, and then the brand message doesn't feel consistent, doesn't feel like what I want to put out there. Your Instagram is phenomenal. Like, whoever's your team is doing a phenomenal job. It's beautiful. It's cohesive. There's real brand clarity and alignment with your message, et cetera. And there's consistency so that people can know what to expect. How did you get to that from where you were just doing it yourself? When you started to let go, did it feel like it was still your brand? Did it feel like it was your look and feel? Did you kind of have to let go of that and let it evolve organically? What was that process like?
There were a bunch of steps along the way. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to spend a day with Lewis Howes, and Lewis was awesome. He's exactly who you'd want him to be. He's a podcaster, author, hosts conferences, but he's a good person. And he just said, hey, like, let's do an interview for my book. If you want to spend a day with me in LA, why don't you come out and bring your team? So I brought a few people from my team, and he spent like half of a day just breaking down the BookThinkers business and making a bunch of recommendations. And I remember, and I'll go back to his lesson in a minute, but I remember being in the car that evening with kind of like our ops guy, Luke. And I was just telling Luke, I said, it's very clear to me right now that I am not the best person to manage our social media accounts anymore. In fact, maybe a couple of years from now, my face isn't even on there. Like, how scary of a thought is that? Because I'm every piece of content right now, but I if I truly want to scale this thing, I don't need to be. And I just remember thinking, like, we've got to outsource this to somebody else. And it took me a few months, but we got there. So what did Lewis tell me? I realized that Lewis has like 25 people on his team that manage all of the socials, that edit all of the content, that help him amplify his voice. And that content is a team sport. Just like I was talking about, being an author is a team sport. So is content, podcasting, distribution. And on top of that, what I think I realized was that one of those complementary services that BookThinkers offers is social media management. Like, we manage other people's voices, and like, my team does a great job at managing other people's voices, posting content, editing content, creating copy, responding to comments and stuff. And I didn't trust them to do it for me, which was so goofy. So, just like all of those little inputs over time allowed me to let go. And once I let go, huge weight off my shoulders and better performance. So it's one of those things that, like, in hindsight, I wish I did it so much sooner.
How does your team do another channel in that other channel's voice? What do you need from them in order to make sure that it's in their voice?
Our social media manager for an author would read their book and then really start to understand their content, listen to a bunch of podcasts that they've been on. Then they have an intro call with the author and talk a little bit about what that process looks like. Like, how do you create captions? What's your voice sound like? What are the do's? What are the don'ts? As far as the don'ts are concerned, that's really important because we never want to misrepresent somebody. And then I think for a couple of weeks, it's a very interactive process. The first couple of weeks, every time a post goes up, let's get on the phone and talk about it. Does it sound like it's you? Does it sound like something that you'd say? And as far as being inauthentic is concerned, like, we do our best to avoid that. We try to amplify the author's message. I mean, what I realized was that I thought it was going to be inauthentic to let somebody else generate a caption for me in my voice. Right. But what I realized was that creating great copy is different than being authentic. But if you can kind of pair them both together, you can actually amplify your message more effectively. And so my most authentic voice was not necessarily great copy. And so I'm viewing what's happening today as somebody improving my ability to communicate by taking a core message from the piece of video content or from my book review. Like, I'll write up a sample caption or in a video review that's literally me speaking, but then they'll create copy based on that. That's a better version of what I was trying to say.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.